Now, as you can tell by the huge pile of moving crates behind me, after 2.5 years, it's finally time to move to a new, much bigger space. But before we embark on that huge undertaking, there's one pretty big problem with the new space we need to solve first. So this is the new office space, and as you can tell, it is a palace compared to the previous one. But aside from the massive size increase, as you can probably hear, there's a big problem with this space. The absurd echo, which we definitely have to deal with. But before getting started with my grandiose construction plans, I needed to get sciencey and measure the echo with my calibrated microphone. Now, to measure the echo, I use software called Room EQ Wizard, which plays a consistent frequency sweep over the entire audible spectrum, which can be used for a bunch of things, but here I'm using it to measure the decay time of that frequency sweep. Okay, now the measurements are kind of wild, and I'm probably going to explain why with voiceover, because this echo is really crazy. After Room EQ Wizard does the measurements, it shows the results in a graph like this. Now, I'm sure a bunch of you are primed to click off this video the moment a graph showed up, but don't worry, it's pretty straightforward. It's called an RT60 graph, which plots how long it takes a sound at any given frequency to reduce its volume by 60 decibels. Hence, reverberation times 60. So the higher the number, the longer the echo rings in the room. See? That wasn't too bad. Now, in a bigger room, the ideal RT60 is between 0.4 and 0.6 seconds, whereas the result I measured from my new space looked like this, with peak reverb times of over 2 seconds, which is the kind of numbers that puts a medium-sized indoor swimming pool to shame. And because I don't want to bankrupt myself sound treating this space, I came up with a plan to build my own big-ass sound panels, which, considering my checkered history with manual labor, should go very well. Step number 1. Get some wood. But once I loaded all of the wood we calculated we needed, the scale of the undertaking became clear, especially considering the new office is up 4 flights of stairs. And once all the wood was loaded, I also needed to buy some rock wool insulation, which is going to function as the acoustic absorber in the panels. You just need to edit that out. No! And after just carrying a single bale of rock wool up 4 flights of stairs, I was already considering faking my own death just to get out of this rental contract. Okay, so how many do we have here? This is... Oh, come on! So I had to slog back to the Rona for a single piece of PT Brown. Now, for this project, I decided to build huge 2.5 meters squared sound panels as opposed to something more reasonably sized like the ones behind me here, which are a lot more efficient at covering just a lot of surface area on the walls. But the reason that I'm going with huge panels instead is because my new office is wedged between 2 other offices separated by what I can only describe as paper walls. And not only are they quite noisy, I also don't want my constant shouting about gonorrhea disturbing them. So I want the option in the future, if it's necessary, to expand these huge panels into full double walls separating me from the other offices. So with that, let's get to the building. The first panel needs to fit under this air conduct in front of this door, so I did some very professional measurements in preparation for cutting. Now, when it comes to the cutting, I don't have any power tools, but according to some guy on Reddit, this meter box with the included saw is a great peasant solution, but I quickly discovered a huge shortcoming to this method. There's no other way to put it. Manually sawing sucks. Oh, no way. That single piece has basically broken my spirit, and there's still that much left. Now, when cutting the next piece of wood, I realized that because of friction, as you get deeper into the piece of wood, it gets harder to saw it. So I had the genius idea of halfway through turning the plank around and starting again with less friction from the top, which did make the second piece easier, but it still felt like bamboo fingernail torture on my nerd body. And there was another problem. Okay, well, my strategy of turning it over halfway through the cut makes it way easier, but we do need to perfect it a little bit because we did go a bit skew despite our meter box or whatever. But that bit of suffering has given us our two vertical pieces, so I can now make the outer frame before I have to cut down the beams. That is huge. And now we get to the very exciting part of figuring out that I bought the wrong screws to get this all to go together. So, yay, let's do that. But luckily, the screws worked very well, and soon the outer frame was finished. So we now have the outside of a frame that was very professionally screwed together by me. But now we need to do the beams. So I need to measure them out, and then I am gonna have to cut them. So there's quite a lot more sawing that needs to happen, but it's gonna just be for this panel. I'm gonna rearrange how I connect them with the other panels because we have less of a height concern with those, so that I don't have to cut any beams. And just like that, it was time for me to get back to what felt like eternal damnation of sawing. So much suffering and pain. Oh, thank God. But with the last beam cut, I was ready to screw together the hardest to assemble frame. The other two frames were way easier. I just had to measure out the beam spacing so the rock wool will fit between them and then screw them together. The only issue I had here was with all this screwing, my drill started to overheat. But luckily, I had a great solution. I then reinforced the corners with metal brackets before enlisting Anna's help with covering them in fabric. Because the panels were so massive, Anna had to seam together two pieces of fabric to cover their entire footprint. Once Anna finished, we put the frames on the fabric and used a staple gun to try and tension the fabric over the frame. The reason we used fabric as a wall front was so that sound could penetrate it and get absorbed in the rock wool. Once the fabric was attached to the frames, it was time to fill it with rock wool. Now, rock wool may be a great insulator, but it kinda sucks to work with. Because you can't make skin contact with it, it feels like you're stuffing your panel with a hive full of angry bees. But once the panel was stuffed to the brim, we stretched over and stapled down some backing material to keep the rock wool in and preventing us from ever accidentally touching it and getting whatever the skin equivalent of a urinary tract infection is. The final couple steps was attaching some shelving brackets at the bottom of the panel that function as feet, starting with the two in the back and then lifting the panel and attaching two more on the front while Anna held it up. Well, now comes the moment of truth. We need to hope that that fits under that pipe. Oh. And it did! It fit like a glove, which means after what felt like an eternity, the panels were finally finished, and it was time to admire them in all their monolithic majesty. And now comes the most important bit. We have to see how much of a difference it made. Now, remember the initial measurement, which looked like this massive mountain of terrible reverb with peaks of over 2 seconds. But after we put the panels in, it went from that to this, which is a huge improvement. Now, it's still not perfect, but it's a lot better. And remember, this is in a huge open room without any furniture in it that's basically made of reflective surfaces. So once we put furniture in there, it's gonna be way better than that. We're also gonna lay some carpet and stuff in areas to help with that very acoustically reflective wooden floor. But all in all, I'm pretty happy with the result. Which brings me to the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. Next week, at some point, I'm gonna bring out a video documenting the move. You'll see the current state of this space, which is kind of wild, and the process of moving the huge mountain of tech from here to the new office, which should be very fun. Anyway, if you don't want to miss that, subscribe to the channel, and until then, Bye-bye.